Okay, Boker Tov. So today's daf is Chafei. We're sort of at the bottom of Chafei, so we'll hopefully about a half daf ahead. So we'll be able to finish on Sunday. And we pick up in the middle of Chafei of Aleph. So now we are starting to get to ways in which times at which the Amei Haaretz are believed, and these distinctions are done away with. And one of them is in Yehuda, they're believed about Kodesh. Only in Yehuda near the Beis Hamikdash, and then in all places they're believed about Truma at the time of the pressing of the grapes and of the oil and of the olives. Partly, Rashi says it's based on certain facts on the ground that people, because it was the beginning of a whole season, everybody went and took all their vessels to the mikvah and so on. So there was a greater assumption that everybody was doing it tahara, and also, as Rashi is going to say in a little bit, because otherwise you would be excluding Kohanim from the ability to get all this truma. Kohanim who were chaverim, so there was a certain policy, social policy in place, particularly from the perspective of the chaverim, to ensure that that this would be a time where you could believe people. So the Gemara says like this: V'ramini, I'll ask you on this. That somebody who finishes his, pressing his olives should leave over a basket of unpressed olives and give it to a poor Kohen who, in parentheses, is a chaver. What does it mean? Why should he press the olives? Because unpressed olives don't have liquid coming in contact with them and are not susceptible for becoming tamei. So basically what it's saying is, here you are in Am Haaretz, you want to give your truma to a Kohen who's a chaver. Here's the advice. The advice is don't give it after it's become olive oil, after it's become grape juice or pre-fermented wine. Give it to them in the form of olives and grapes before it's come in contact with liquid, and then it won't be susceptible for tuma, right? But okay, and then they'll be able to accept it. So anyway, the upshot is that you're not believed on tumantara even at the time of the pressing of the olives and the grapes. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman lo kasha. Depends whether we're dealing with early or late. If basically we're dealing here with that this was a late harvest of the olives, and therefore when you were getting around to pressing it, it was no longer the normal season of pressing, and therefore it was a time period when you would not be believed, you the Am Haaretz. But it's an exception, it's not a general rule. Only Rabbi Barabba. Gon Mai, what would be an example? Gon Osan Shabei Savicha. Like your father's has presumably an olive orchard, and his stuff always ripens late, and his stuff always is ready for pressing after the time of the pressing. Okay, that's one answer. Rav Yosef Amar B'Galila Shanu. We're talking about in the Galilee. Now, to say it's B'Galila Shanu, that is interesting. It means that even on the issue of truma and the time of the pressing, there's a difference between Judea and the Galilee. Now, we understood before why that made a difference for Kodesh, because only in Judea were they able to get to the Beis Hamikdash, so there was a different context for the aspects of Kodesh than in the Galil. But why by Truma should it make a difference? So let's see what the Gemara says about this. So the Gemara says like this. If I asked on this, we have a breita. Aver Yardin Galil, the Transjordan area and the Galilee, Harein Ki Yehuda. They're just like Judea for truma purposes. They're believed that the wine is tahor when it's the time of pressing wine, and that the oil is tahor when it's the time of pressing oil. But not when it's the pressing season for the other thing. But when it's their own pressing season, people are believed to say it's tahor for truma. Not only for Kodesh, for Truma, and even in the Galilee. So Ella Machvar to Kedushin Mekar. The first answer was better. It was an exception. It wasn't exactly the normal season. That's why it was a problem. But the clear principle here is that this belief that everybody believes about Truma at the time of pressing is regardless of geographical location. Okay, so here we have that in addition to the idea of belief by Kodesh in general. Joe, good to see you back. You doing okay? Okay. All right. So in addition to believability by Kodesh in general, there's a believability around Truma in all locations at the time that it's being pressed, at the time when it's most urgent to be believed about it. Now, if this time passes over, and an Amartz brings to a Chaver a barrel of wine, you shouldn't accept it. Hey, Menu, I can't take it now because I can't believe you now, and I'll be stuck with Truma Tmeya. Says, you know what, do me a favor. Hold on to it and bring it back to me like 10 months from now at the next time of the pressing season, and then I'll be able to believe you. Even though it's the exact same barrel. We're going to see something just like this coming up later also.
Which gives it more opportunity to become tummy.
Well, that is a good point. So it's an excellent point, actually. Okay, so diving in Rav Sheshes.
The whole thing is abstracted into a formality.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Let's say the Kohen Chaver accepted the barrel of wine or oil, and he didn't say bring it back to me. So is he now allowed to hold on to it till the next pressing season, and then say now here it is now 10 months from now. Oh yeah, 10 months ago the guy told me it was Torah. Now I can believe it, and then he can make it Torah. So can he hold on to it, and then it will change its status? So Amar Lahu. So he said in Tanikua, we taught it. Chaver Amar Aretz sheyarshu esavihem. Chaver ve'Amaretz. Excuse me. Sheyarshu esavihem. So now what happens is the following: a Chaver and an Amar Aretz both their father passed away. And their father was Am Haaretz. Their father himself was an Am Haaretz. So their father left behind all of these wine and grapes and olives and grain and all of this stuff. The problem is that because he was an Am Haaretz, a Chaver would have to assume that all of that is Tameh. Okay? Now, you have his sons. One of them actually went ahead and became a Chaver. The other one remained an Am Haaretz. All right? So, what is their story? Now you can say, okay, whatever. So you split it up and you deal with the tummy stuff. Well, maybe there's stuff that's actually Torah that has never become in contact with liquid, and maybe that's the stuff that the Chaver wants, not the stuff that So I'll take the dry stuff. You take the stuff that's come in contact with liquid. So here's the problem. The problem is that if you say that we are like equal partners in everything, then if I take the dry grain and you take the grain that's been washed, what effectively we're doing is we're saying, I will give you my half of the washed grain for your half of the dry grain. So basically, I am now giving you, the Am Haaretz, stuff that is Tameh in order to take the stuff that's Tahor. I'm not allowed to do that as a Chaver because I'm basically leading you into sin. I am actually giving you stuff that's Tameh that I know that you're not going to be careful about observing the restrictions about it. So a Chaver is not allowed to give an Am Haaretz something that is already is already.
But if they're all partners, then they're all partners in it anyway. I'm not giving you anything. I'm just saying, just take.
No, but effectively, we're 50% owners in everything. So we really should split everything down the middle. But we're actually saying, I'd rather take the dry stuff and you take the washed stuff. Well, then it's like we're swapping our portions for the dry for the wet. So that's a problem.
You could just as easily say, I'll take this, as opposed to saying, you give me this.
No, but you have to do that.
But legally, what's happening is, but there is a way in which it could be seen like it's just the natural way of splitting, which is if it is the same the same type of thing that we're splitting. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So, So let's take a look. So. You can say to him, you take the wheat, the wheat grain over there, and I'll take the wheat grain over here. It happens to be the one I'm giving you is the stuff that's been washed, and the one I'm taking is the stuff that's dry. Or you take the wine over there, and I'll take the wine over here. Exactly how the wine is not a problem. Is not exactly clear to me, but okay, somehow it's in context. It's where you know as the chaver that the wine in a certain place was processed in a way that was totally okay. Aval lo yomer lo tolot alach vani yadesh. Within the same grain, I can't say to you, you know what? You just take the wet grain, the stuff that's been sort of washed, and I'll take the dry one. Tolot achitin vani seorim. Or you take the wheat, and I'll take the barley. Because something like wheat and barley is clearly we're switching our portions. Interesting thing is even the prior stuff, even if it's all wheat and wheat, if I specifically designate, well, you take the washed wheat and I'll take the dry, that still seems like I'm switching my portion for you. But if it's relatively arbitrary, you take the stuff, half of his stuff is in one field and half is in the other field. You just take the stuff over there, I'll take the stuff here. Then that's just okay. That's just a way of dividing. It's not swapping. And this is on the principle of like yesh brera. That if it's a sort of total natural division, then we can say, well, that was the stuff that was always going to be yours, and his was the stuff that was always going to be his, and there was no swapping that took place. if it's what we would consider to be a natural way of dividing it. But if there's more of a sense of, no, actually, I'd rather, some type of a sense of exchanging my part of this and your part of that, then that's seen as an actual sense of, giving you the tame stuff and me taking the tahor stuff, and that would be a problem because of a type of a least here.
But isn't it in effect? Isn't he really doing that?
What?
In effect,
Yeah,
isn't
in
he really
effect,
doing
in
that?
effect, it is doing that. It's always doing that. But the question is, when do we have to sort of legally see it that way, right? When do we just see it as like, no, you had to split it somehow. So this is your, that's your. There's no swapping. When do we see it? When do we see it as a split, and when do we see it as a swapping of my portion for your portion? Now you're right. If we say aim braille, we always see it as a swapping because then there's never a predetermined portion which is mine or yours. But if we say yesh brayer, then it means that when it's a natural type of a division, we could see it like this was always your part, and that was always his part. When it's a less natural type of division, then we see it as an exchanging. Okay, all right. The Tanyala. Now we taught on this. Also chaver sarei falach umeniach et hayavesh. So this chaver, that if he's a kohen, okay, and he basically gets stuff that has come in contact with liquid or actually is liquid, but now let's say the lach in the case over there, like the washed grain. So what can he do with it? So it's truma tmeya. So he's not allowed to eat truma tmeya. The only thing you do with truma tmeya is that you burn it. Okay, but he doesn't have to worry about the stuff that's never been in contact with liquid because that's tahor. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, now here's the key question. Why, if it worked out that he took, he had to take he had to split it down the middle and he had to take stuff that he had to assume was tame that had been washed, why does he have to burn it? Why not just why not just wait till the next pressing time, right? And then he'll be able to believe that it was tahor. Now, the interesting thing is the person who actually knows it's tahor or could make that claim is dead. Right? The father died. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is, it sounds like you don't even need somebody to make a claim. It just seems to be like at the time of the pressing, we can just assume that everything is tahor. Right? We can just assume everything is tahor at the time of pressing. So you don't even have to get the father to come back. And so if the reality is that you can just assume at that time, even stuff that's already come into your possession, then why doesn't he just wait around?
Does that work if you know something was pressed not in that season? No, it's not. It's just right.
Right. Well, you mean if it's pressed not at the season?
Exactly. And you wait. How formalized is it?
Right. That's an interesting question too. Right. We are dealing with it was pressed during the season, but it wasn't delivered. Right. And can you sort of wait around till the next time? Right. You're saying, let's say Dafka wasn't pressed. Well, I think that was the case before by the late olives. Right, where the case of the late olives, it seemed that you didn't have another alternative. So it seems that minimally it does have to have been pressed during the right season. That at least there's maybe some facts that support it. So let's see what the Gemara's answer is. No, maybe it's a type of a thing that there's no season for pressing, right? Who knows what it is? It's some type of a thing. Maybe anyway, it's grain and it's washing of a grain, and maybe this also, first of all, it's not clear that this applies to stuff that's not olive oil and grapes. Right, which has a very particular season, and you gather it all together, and there's a very limited time that everybody's working on pressing it, and so on. Something like grain, obviously there's seasons for grain, but it does not have that same type of a focused period, and maybe it wasn't the same reality. So anyway, there's not even any evidence it applies to non-olive and grapes, and it wouldn't apply to something that did not have a pressing season. Okay, so the Gemara says, okay, but we're about to learn that everybody's also believed on the regel that the truma is tahor. Okay, and maybe again, you don't have to ask anybody. You can just assume everything is tahor, and you just wait till the regel. So, all right, it's something that'll spoil. Okay, so we don't have any evidence from that it says destroy it, that it means there's no options. Maybe in theory there are options if you wait for the gas or you wait for the regel, but we'd be talking in a scenario where that's not available. So we don't have an answer to the question of if you've actually already received it, and therefore had to assume it's tameh, maybe you just wait till the right time and then can assume it's tahor. Okay, and presumably once you assume it's tahor, it doesn't become tameh again. Meaning once you raise it to the next gas, and now you can assume it's tahor, we don't say after that period is over, it becomes tameh. Once it gets a stamp of tahor, it remains that way. So it's pretty formalist. Yeah,
a very broad application of the idea of nemanis on the regel.
Right.
Because I would have thought that, well, if it's a regel, people know that they're supposed to be tar. So something that he's eating on the regel, you can assume it's tar. But 6 months ago, when he was preparing and he's processing it,
right. So that's an excellent point, and that gets exactly to this issue that how much is it based on the real facts of people's care, and how much is it based on certain policy concerns. That when you get to the bottom of it, in terms of technical halacha, we would believe people. All of these are stringencies upon stringencies, and we're going to waive them
Waiting
because
for this
of
window of
exactly. And we'll see that the regal point is not so much based on the issue of the greater care people show on the regal. It's great on Chazal's desire to create a sense of unity among the people on the regal. But it's an excellent point. Right here's something that clearly was handled before the regal, and nevertheless has that assumption. Yeah.
If the rabbis put these restrictions on about who can be trusted, they can waive them.
Well,
at
that's
particular
basically
times.
what I'm saying. Exactly. All right. Again, the question to me whether the rabbis were the ones that invented these restrictions, but they're certainly the ones that are coming to modify them.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's again, the guy says he brings you your barrel of wine, and it's not during the times of the pressing. So I really can't take it now because I can't assume that it's of course. If you were to separate out from that a little wine to make it for Nesachim, for Kodesh, then I would be able to believe you about the wine because you always believe them about Kodesh, and then I could believe you about the rest of the barrel as well because it's all connected. So that works. Okay, wait, and not. So the word says like this. It's not awesome. So we taught over there. That they agree that you check for people who are going to bring their Pesach, they come by Shammai, but not for people who are going to eat Truma. My boat, what are you checking? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Menafeach Adam Beit HaPras V'Holech. So you basically have a field that has a grave that was plowed over there and has possibly little bits of bone in the field, and that's considered rabbinically. You're not allowed to walk through that field or you'll become tamei. But you have to cross through that field in order to get to Yerushalayim to bring your Korban Pesach. Or you have to cross through that field, I don't know, to get home and eat your truma, whatever the case is. So is there a way you can cross through that field? So they say what you do is you blow, it's sort of like clearing the field for mines. So you blow the area right in front of you, so it would blow away any little chips of bone on the surface, and then you take a step. Then you blow the area in front of you and you take a step. So you can do that if you have to cross that field to eat your Korban Pesach, and you're considered to be tahor.
You blow it with
your mouth.
you're walking across the field,
They
blow
didn't
it.
leaf blower. So
Step.
You better start Motzi Pesach.
Okay, fine.
To get there
All
for
right.
Sukkot, yeah.
Yeah, this comes up.
Yeah.
This comes up a number of times.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can do that for Pesach. It's more urgent for Pesach, obviously. If you don't bring your Pesach now, you're going to blow it. And Truma, there's no urgency. So, you know what? I wasn't even thinking about that. Truma, there's no urgency. Okay, so that you don't allow this for Truma. Okay. Here's another assumption that you can make. Osei Pesach. For if you're doing your Pesach and people have walked a path through this field already, and you can see that it's been trampled down, right? The earth has been pressed down by people's walking. Then, because it's been pre-tread, that somehow allows you to assume that there are no real chips of bone that are left in that path.
somebody else must have the leaf blower.
Yeah, I don't know why being pre-tread allows you to assume that, because it's not necessarily true that the people who walked cared about Tumah. Maybe they weren't Kohanim and whatever, but for some reason, the fact that they tread it makes us assume that somehow the chips of bones have been dislodged off of that tread.
But again, it's only Osei Pesach, right?
If for the purpose that you need to cross through that field to bring your
But
Korban Pesach.
everybody else is bringing their Korban Pesach too.
That's good maybe. Okay, so if you're doing it for Pesach, again, you can be lenient either by blowing or if there's a path that's been tread. They did not put their position up to prevent you from, bringing a Pesach, which otherwise you'd be liable kares. They didn't make their restrictions something that stands in the way of you possibly being liable kares. But truma, but to prevent you from eating truma, they did say, they had their position, they erected their position, they kept it because to prevent you from eating truma when you are trumas meis, which is a chiyuv misa. Now it's not exactly the same. It's a weird parallel because by the Pesach you're chayiv kares if you don't bring the Pesach. By truma you're chayiv misa b'dei shemayim if you eat the truma when you're tmeya, if you do it. So it's funny. It's we wanted you to be able to do the Pesach, and if, otherwise you'd be chayiv kares. So we had to move out of the way to let you do the Pesach. We didn't want you to get kares, but we are preventing you. In the case of the truma, not like now you're gonna be chayav misa. We're preventing you because that'll protect you from being chayav misa. So it's the same point. We don't want you to be chayav kars. We don't want you to be chayav misa. But it's a funny way it's structured in this parallel.
But
Yes.
if the idea is one of nemanus, that you relax the principles of nemanus in general,
Yes.
then first of all, I withdraw what I said before about other people use that path. It could be any path, but the idea is that you rely on other people in general.
Right.
So
So.
you wouldn't have walked on that path.
So
if
the
it were-
reliability is very specific, meaning the reliability that we've been talking about, right, is around. Oh, I see. You're thinking because Pesach is the time of
Yeah,
the
but
regel
also-
and so on. Yeah, the Gemara. Let's see why the Gemara brings this in. The Gemara has not brought this into the assumption that the reliability that we've been talking about whether the food is tameh or not, translates into a general reliability about other things. Like if you come into, I don't know, like let's say it happens to be the regel. And I mean, there are other types of.
But
Right.
you can't make a distinction between. You shouldn't make a distinction between truma and pesach though, because for both of those things related to tuma, it's not a question of is it like shevi al taseh,
Right.
kumbase, or kares, or whatever. It's all about the nemanus on this kind of drabanan.
Right, but this is seen as more of an override or a leniency less than an amonos, right? You're the one blowing the path. I mean, it's true the nidosh has to do with other people, but I don't think the nidosh is because you assume other people blew it. I think it just assumes that the natural process of treading somehow dislodges the bone, though I don't really understand that. But this really is not based on amonos. The first case, clearly not. It's about blowing. This is based on, do we allow this leniency, to this way of assuming that this will address the tumor problems, it's a leniency, do we allow it for this type of overriding concern? Yeah.
You're only chayav karet on Pesach if you're within a day of Yerushalayim.
Right.
So, but they don't mention any.
That's a good point.
limitation there.
You're right. It's more like the category of chayav cars, but also say you can pass a sheni. Anyway, let's take a look. Let's see. Let's try to figure out what the Gemara is doing with this. Ibayalu, they ask a question. Baruch lepischo ma'u sheyochal b'trumaso. This is where it becomes a little more relevant, and we'll see why it's bringing it in. So you went ahead and you blew this path and walked through it and brought your korban pesach, and now I want to eat my truma. Okay, so what can I do? Can I assume I'm also tahor for truma purposes? It'd be a little absurd to say I'm tahor to bring the korban pesach, but when I want to eat truma, I have to assume I'm tameh. Okay, but that's the question they're asking, and now we're going to see why it brought it in.
Well, if you compare kare to me to be de shemayim, what
I understand, but it's also like, can we give me a different status for different things? So let's take a look. So ulam or badak lepisco mutalechol b'trumaso. If you walk through this path by the blowing and you can bring your pesach, then you're tahor. You can eat your truma. Rabbi bar ulam or badak lepisco aser lechol b'trumaso. You can't. Amleyahu saba lo tiflag aleduula. So a certain elder said to Rabbi, don't argue on ula, who says if you're good for one, it's good for the other. It's non-kivaseh. Our Mishnah supports him. Our Mishnah says, Im Amar Hifrashi Latocha Revius Kodesh Neman. That if he says that I took a little glass of wine out of that barrel and I made it Kodesh, then he's believed about the whole barrel of wine, since he's believed on the little glass that's going to be for Nesachim. So why don't we say no? He's believed on the Kodesh one. He's not believed on the rest of the barrel. But we don't say that. Alma mida hemina Kodesh, meheminami truma. If you're believed for one, you believe for the other. Here, because he's believed now, though this isn't you, somebody else will believe, since he is trusted that the blowing did a sufficient job for the purposes of Pesach. It also works for Truma. We're not going to say the same person is tahor for one thing and tamei for another. Okay, in the same way, the same barrel of wine is going to be tahor for taking kodesh out of it, but tamei for truma. All right, so that's what that was brought in to illustrate those things, and there's no response. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, the last one. Okay, which is barrels of wine and of oil, which are miduma'at, which normally means some type of a mix of truma and chulin, could also mean teva, normally means a mix of truma and chulin. They're believed on them at the time of the bitot, and beforehand 70 days. Okay, so that's very bizarre. What is the status of miduma'at, and why does it have a special status? Let's take a look. Tana, einem manim, lo ala kankanim, v'lo ala truma. So they're not believed, not relating to the actual barrels themselves, the jugs themselves, and not on the truma. So what does this mean? Gemara says like this. Demai, what are we talking about? Ikan kanim to kodesh. If we're talking about like jugs that have in it wine or oil that they've sanctified, for Beis HaMikdash purposes, it sort of goes to that thing we said before about it all being interrelated, although we'll see later times when we don't say that. But for now, if you're going to believe them that the wine in the jug is tahor, you're going to believe them that the jug is tahor. Ella, concerning to truma, so they're not believed about the jugs of truma. Pshita, of course you're not believed if it's not a special, if it's not the shas hagitot, if it's not the special time. Of course you're not believed on the jugs. Hasha truma lo mehemen. If you're not believed on the truma itself, concerning mehemen, why would you believe on the jugs? So what's the scenario where you're not believed on the jugs, but you are? It says lo ala kankanim, the lo ala truma. So if it's not the truma, presumably we're talking about not the time of the gato. So of course not on the kankanim. So when is there ever something special to be said about the jugs? Ella b'reikanim de kodesh. We're talking about empty jugs, and they're jugs you normally use to put your kodesh wine and oil in. But it happens to be right now it's empty. Ubishar yimos hashana, and the rest of the year. So the rest of the year, if I tell you this wine is kodesh, it's tahor, you believe me, even if I'm an amaretz. Okay, and if I brought it in a jug, you'd believe that the jug is tahor. That's what the Gemara says. It's all, you can't say one without the other. Okay, but if this is the jug that I normally use for my kodesh wine, right now it doesn't have kodesh wine in it, and you're the chaver and you want to borrow my jug, and I say, sure, I'll tell you what, I'll even let you use my jug that I use for my kodesh wine, and you can use it and borrow it, you would have to still take it to the mikvah. Because even though you believe me that it's tahor when the kodesh wine was in it, right now when it's only about the jug, you have to assume it's tameh. Okay? So that's cutting the kodesh, ubishar yimos hashana. That's when you don't believe them about the jugs. Now, ubimleim de truma ubishas hagito. Now, there could even be a time where you believe them about the truma and not about the jugs, and this is ironic. You go ahead and right, you have a jug filled with truma. You believe me that the truma is tahor. You believe me because it's the time of the pressing, but you don't believe me about the jug. So you're going to go ahead and I'm going to bring my here it is, my jug of wine to you, the Kohen Chaver, and give you my truma, and it's going to time of the gatos, and you can believe me that it's tahor, but you're going to say, you know what, why don't you just pour it into my vessel here? Take your vessel back, okay? Because you can't actually treat the vessel is tahor, only the wine in it, which is of course bizarre. How could the wine in it be tahor and the vessel be tameh?
The vessel doesn't affect.
Okay, so that's just the fiction that we live with. Okay, which is again, initially assumed it's all got to be the same, and here it's like not necessarily. We can believe you on the wine without believing you on the vessel. Okay, so if you take a look at Rashi, just to see Rashi spell this out, about 15 lines before the lines got wide. Now here's Rashi points out that if it's really just based on the fact that everybody is being careful, then if everybody's really being careful now, if you're going to believe them on the wine, you're going to believe them on the jugs, right? Mm-hmm. So now Rashi gets to the policy issue, and it's a little self-serving policy issue. So let's take a look. He says, "It's lo gozral tumason b'shas hagisos we may hefsid kohanim chaverim denimsa mafsida may rove trumas eretz Yisrael." So it's not just everybody is really careful during this period of time. It's we've got to make it mutter during this period of time, or all the kohanim are going to lose out on 90% of the truma. So okay, now we'll believe you. Okay, that's only for the wine. That's only for the stuff that they need. But al hakankanim lo heminum. They ain't going chavim mikavim and kankanim imat truma. Avol ma'arino so likelehen. Okay, so pour it into my thing. But here it's quite fascinating that you really see, and we're going to see it again by the regel, that there are certain policy considerations. Now, the regel is less self-serving. The regel is to create a sense of unity. This is to ensure that the chaverim get their share of the truma. Okay, now presumably there are some facts to base it on. People are more careful at the time of gatot, more careful at the time of the regel. But you know what? At the end of the day, these are the policy considerations. And the thing to make it understandable is that from the strict halachic point of view, everybody would always be believed all the time. All of this is just stringencies upon stringencies, so we're more at liberty to waive it. But again, Rashi really makes clear the policy issues here. Okay, so let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says like this. So bales of wine and bales of oil that are mixed, which we still don't really know what that means. So what does that mean? My love, nidumaot the truma. Doesn't that mean that they are mixed with truma? So meaning that they have truma in it, and it says that the kadim are also believed. It says the barrels, right, or the pitchers of wine and oil right? That's the point of the Mishnah, not just the wine and oil. The language is kadeyain v'kadei shemen ne'emanim aleihem, right? So that's what the Mishnah said. It said, first it said, the wine you're believed b'shas hagatot, and the kadim, the pictures, you're believed even 70 days before. Okay, so here it's explicit. For God's sakes, you're believed on the pictures even 70 days before, certainly at the time of the gatot. Why are you telling me you're not believed on the vessels? So doesn't it mean that it has truma in it? And even anything that's going to have truma in it or going to be used for truma, you're believed even 70 days before. So the Gemara says, so Ami debate Rabbi Chia, no, miduma'ot to kodesh. No, it means stuff that you're going to use for kodesh purposes. Okay, and that's why you're believed on them, even about the jugs themselves. So the Gemara says, 1 minute, when we talk about a mix for kodesh, a mix for truma might mean tevet. So meduma'ot l'truma might mean that I'm using pictures. It isn't yet the time of pressing, but I'm using them for my grapes. My grapes aren't yet truma, but they're meduma'ot l'truma because they're going to be, truma is going to be separated from them. So meaning that would be a way of saying all the types of vessels I'm going to be using for this stuff that truma is going to come out of. So the same way I'm believed about the truma, I'm even believed about the vessels that I'm using with the olives and the grapes that have the pre-truma mixed into them effectively because it's teveh. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That would tell me that I'd be believed about the vessels. But you said I'm not believed about the vessels. So saying, okay, we're talking not about truma, we're talking about kodesh. So what does dimua mean in the context of kodesh? So the Gemara says, "Umiyat diika dimua lekodesh, ami debei Rabbi Lai b'metaras tivlo lito mimenu nesachim." Yes, because what it means is that I have declared my intention that I'm going to be taking wine for nesachim out of what we're going to be pressing, the wine we're going to be pressing. So here we are, we're harvesting all the grapes. I make an announcement, guys, I want everybody to be super careful. I want everybody to be super careful because we're anyway careful this time, but let's be super careful because I'm going to be using some of this wine to bring my nesachim from. I've declared my intention, so these grapes seem to have potential, or like not potential, like a separated out kodesh, and therefore, because that's their status, you can even believe the status of the vessels that are used, not just the status of the wine. Okay, so that's a really hard read in the Mishnah. Let's just admit that the pshat of the Mishnah is that you're believed on the vessels more than the wine. The wine you're only believed b'shas hagatot, and the vessels you're believed even 70 days before. Why do you think, by the way, you'd be believed in the vessels before you begin to be believed about the wine? You have to prepare the vessels ahead of time. Okay, so that's the simple sense of the Mishnah. But since the Gemara says that you're not believed on the vessels for truma, only on the wine, only on the actual, sort of food, it has to go ahead and make it a special case of kodesh, not a case of truma. And now let's just look at this idea that the belief of the vessels begins 70 days before. So kodem l'gita shivim yom. Our Rabbi says, Abai shmamina. We hear from this. Dinahu, the rule is, or the practice is, the iluyei arisa, it is on the sharecropper, the mitrach agofi, to worry about the vessels, shivim yomim mikmi d'matzarta, 70 days before the actual time of the harvest. So if you believe 70 days before, it means that the normal practice is to start preparing everything already. That's a long time, like 2 months before the actual period of the harvest. Okay, so that's the issue of believed on the vessels as opposed to just the wine. But given the Gemara that you're not believed on it, we really highlight, as Rashi points out, the policy considerations that are at play here in terms of believing people about the truma. Yes.
The further we go in this, the more it seems like this is bizarro Talmud.
Yes.
Like, what is this idea that because you announce that, what category is that? Because you announce that I'm going to take hektish for this thing. It's like, what is this principle? It doesn't appear anywhere else.
Right, I agree. I mean, I made it a little simplified because it says mitahera tivlo, which means like I'm actually going through and keep saying, trying to do some practice, like I'm not just stating it, but I'm saying, and let's be really careful now that we dunk it in the mitzvah, we realize that we're going to be using it for kodesh. But still, right, it's not
methodology.
I understand. Yeah, I agree. It is. All right, so now, next Mishnah, and now we're sort of coming into, we're circling in on where we do away with these distinctions. So we have kodesh in general in Judea. We've got truma at the time of the pressing. And maybe the issue of the vessels is a little different. And now we get to places near Yerushalayim at all times of the year around. This is about vessels. We're now on vessels for a moment before we get back to food. Mina Modin Ulifnim, from Modin, which is a place about, it says 15 mil outside of Yerushalayim, which is about 15 kilometers. Okay, so it's a significant place. It's like where you could get to Yerushalayim, in a day or in a half a day. So it's in the immediate environs of Yerushalayim. Ne'eman, depending on the traffic, he said. Ne'eman al-kli cheres. You are believed, Amei Aretz are believed that the pottery vessels are tahor at all times. Why is that? So we're going to say that they did not make kilns in Yerushalayim for making pottery, because that would have smelled up Yerushalayim, and even then they had air pollution rules or whatever. So the kilns were always outside of Yerushalayim. Okay, which means you're putting them outside of Yerushalayim. So you're also putting them in the area where where the villagers and the more Amei Haaretz are, presumably, and therefore you've got to come up with a more lenient policy to believe people for the sake of the people in Yerushalayim. You've got to be able to believe the people in the outskirts of Yerushalayim who are the ones making the pottery. Okay, so there we actually, again, in a policy consideration, we are going to believe them. Because people need pottery vessels and they're not able to make them themselves. They're being made on the outskirts, in Yerushalayim, in the industrial area or whatever. And that's where you'll have the Amei Haaretz who are making it. So if you look at Rashi again, in terms of the policy, 5 lines down the wide lines, Rashi says, if you told people you couldn't trust the people who are making the pottery vessels, nobody would be able to live with that. You need to be able to buy pottery vessels. All right, so we'll trust them about the pottery vessels. Okay. Now we're going to see later that it's about like the small and the thin vessels, not the big heavy ones, because the small and the thin ones are the more daily use vessels where there's more of a need, and therefore they gave them, blanket believability. Modin v'luchutz. If, however, it's from Modin away from Yerushalayim, they're not believable. Ketzad, how is this? Hakadar shehu mocher kakderot. You have a jug merchant who's selling his jugs. Nichnas leaf. Now you're going to like this though, because this is both of you though, I guess. But anyway, because this is the absurdity that it's telling you explicitly. The same guy. Here's the guy with the jugs on his back, with his donkey, whatever, his wagon filled with jugs. Nichnas liflimin mina modi'in. He's now, you find him, you bump into him, and he's in from Modin towards Yerushalayim. Hu hakadar ve'ein hakderot ve'ein halochim. The same seller, the same jugs, the same buyers. Ne'eman, you can buy it. Yatsa, if the same guy with the same jugs and the same sellers, you happen to bump into him outside of Modin, he's not believed. So here it spells out to you the pure formalism of this. We got to have rules, and these are the rules. You can't go ahead and check every case individually. These are the rules, and this is how it works. Okay.
Waffle truck is parked on 47th Street.
Right. There you go. Exactly. Okay. Tana. Modim, pamim klifnim, pamim kalachutz. How about Modin itself? Right? You said from inside Modin and outside Modin. What about Modin itself? What's its status? So sometimes it's like the inside and sometimes the outside. This is going to get really weird. Kate said, how is this possible? Kadar yotzei v'chaver nichnas kilifnim. If the jug merchant is going away from Yerushalayim and the chaver is going towards Yerushalayim, so this is the last opportunity, right? Here's Yerushalayim. Here's Modi'in. Okay, Modi'in. Okay, now if you are the chaver and you're heading away from Yerushalayim, and he's the kadar, and he's planning on going towards. Oh, it's the other way around first. Kadar yotzei. Thank you. So you're the kadar, and you're in Modi'in, and you are going away, and this guy is the chaver, and he is heading towards Yerushalayim. So this is the last opportunity the chaver will have to buy the jugs from the kadar, right? Because he's going away and he's going towards. Okay, so since it's the last opportunity that he'll have to do it, we'll consider it like it's towards Yerushalayim and he can buy the jugs. Okay, kadar yotzei v'chaver nichnas kilifni. Shnehem nichnasim. If they're both on their way towards Yerushalayim, so don't buy it in Modi'in. Wait till you get, within Modi'in. Wait till you get, within the inside. This is lifnim. Okay, so wait till this is lochot. So wait till you get into the lifnim section. Don't do it in Modi'in. Get into the lifnim section. Okay, because you're both going in that direction anyway. Okay, just because you're both going in that direction, I don't know how it means they're necessarily traveling together, but okay. Shneim nichnasim. Oh, shneim yotzim kalachutz. The interesting thing though also is that if you're both heading out, it's also kalachot, but that makes a little bit of sense. Since you're on your way out, even when you're in Modi'in, we look at you more as away from Yerushalayim than we look at you as towards Yerushalayim. Okay? Amar Abaye, Afana Nami Tanina. This can also be inferred from the Mishnah, which is that'll be interesting because we didn't see any of this in the Mishnah. Let's take a look. It says the jug seller who is selling them and is now found inside of Modi'in, he's believed. So Taima Dilifnim Mina Modi'in. That means that only inside of Modi'in he's believed. Modim Gufa and Modim itself, Lomem, and he's not believed. Ema Seifa, let's look at the end. Yatsa, if he leaves away outside of Modim, Eino Neman, he's not believed. Hamodim Gufa Neman, it sounds like in Modim he is believed, right? The Mishnah is not clear about Modim. So rather than saying the Mishnah isn't being clear, we're going to reconcile it. It must depend on the case. If the kadar is going away and the chaver is going in, then Modi'in is like it's inside and he is believed. If they're both leaving and they're both going, then it's considered on the outside. And the Gemara accepts that. Shema mina. Oh, that's a good inference. You could have speculated on a dozen other ways of distinguishing, but that's the Gemara is prepared to read that in. Okay, now we have a qualification of why believing them on these vessels. I mentioned this already. Tana, they're believed on the thin ones, on the small ones, to use them for Kodesh purposes. So this is a double qualification. Okay, basically, it's the small ones, not the large ones, because the small ones are the ones that are more in demand, and therefore we need to have greater leniencies. Okay, and we'll see a little bit more about that. But it also says that they're believed on it L'Kodesh, which is not totally clear what it means. Rashi doesn't really fully explicate that. Does it mean even if you want to use it for Kodesh purposes, or only if they claim that this, because it's for Kodesh, that gives them extra believability, like we saw a little bit before. Not exactly clear, but okay. Let's take a look. But the key thing that it's but certainly the idea is it's only on the small ones, on the thin and the small ones. They have to be so small that you can basically carry them with one hand. Even if you basically need to use two hands, maybe they're thin, they're big, but they're thin. It's only if they're empty. If they're full, then not. Normally before we thought that full was better because you could believe on what's inside. But here we'll be dealing with a case where maybe they're not, they're saying, let's say inside is truma, let's say inside is chulin. So they're not believed about chulin wine. They're not believed about truma wine, not during the time of the press. So basically, if they're selling you the jug with the wine in it, but it's not truma, it's not kodesh, it's just chulin, you have to assume the wine is tameh. When you're buying the wine and assuming the wine is tameh, still assume the jug is tahor. It's like the reverse of what we had before, right? Before you bought the wine that was truma at the time of the pressing, you assumed the wine was tahor, but you had to assume the jug was tameh. Here, because it's a special believability about the vessels, it's about pottery vessels from Modim to Lifnim. So we're talking the believability here is specific to the vessels. What if you have to assume the wine is tameh based on the normal rules? Would you be still allowed to assume that the vessel is tahor? Okay, so Reish Lakish says it's only if they're empty. If they're full, and you have to assume that the stuff in it is tameh, so you have to assume that the vessel is tameh too. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu maleim, even if it's the same way that was possible before to say the contradictory idea, right? Before we said the truma wine was tahor and the vessel was tameh. Here we're saying the wine is tameh and the vessel is tahor. Okay, so it says va'afilu api korsuto letocho. Even if your heresy is entitled. No, that's how it means. Api korsuto basically means like your undershirt or something, but nobody exactly knows what the point of saying that is, other than like just, I don't know, some type of a throwaway line. Rashi basically says even like filled with chulin wine. How that api korsuto means that I don't know. The Amar Rava, but anyway, even though the wine is tameh, the vessel is tahor. The Amar Rava, umoder Reb Yochanan b'mashkin atzman shein tmeim. He's not claiming that if it's full, because the vessel is tahor, the liquid is tahor. No, he's saying I can see the liquid is tameh. It's chulin. He's not believed on chulin, or it's truma, not at the time of the gitot. So the liquid is tameh, but nevertheless the vessel is tahor. We're going to live with this contradiction. The al titma, don't be astounded. right? Because obviously you should be astounded, but don't be astounded. Sharei lugin mali mashkim. If you have, pitchers, whatever, filled with liquid, lugin tmeim to mashiva mashkim tarim. You can have the pitchers which are tamei for 7 days because of mate, and the mashkim tarim. You will remember we had this before, that Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, right? The case about the house, right, that had the dead body in it, right? And you had the kli cheres here, and the second thing, right? Remember that? And you had, somebody, and you had food here, whatever. Anyway, so basically what we said was the tuma goes through because you have to assume the kli cheres is tamei, but the Amoritz won't listen to us and believe us. So we'll say for the stuff that we're not going to handle, that only the Amoritz will eat, like the food, that's tamei to us shiva. The stuff we have to, that's tahor, because it's not going to affect us anyway. The stuff we might use, like the vessels, that's going to be tamei tumas shiva. So that's what it says. We have the same thing. The vessel could be tamei tumas shiva, and the food inside of it could be tahor. So here too, the reverse. The wine could be tamei, and the vessel could be tahor. Okay, so we're getting into some crazy ideas. But but the larger theme that we're seeing is the way the policy issues about making sure Kohanim Chaveim get their fair share of the Truma, making sure people have pottery vessels, right? Making sure that people don't run off the derech and abandon us because they don't have access to the Beis Hamikdash. Because of all these various types of considerations, we're going to believe people, even if normally we wouldn't believe them, or because of stringencies, we wouldn't believe them. And we're going to finally get to the idea where this is all leading, which is in the regel, is the big policy consideration that everybody has believed about everything. Okay, let's just try to read one more section here, see if we can get this one quickly. Hagabayim shenichnesu, tax collectors that came into the house, l'toch habayis, and they came to maybe seize some property because you're behind in your taxes. Or let's say thieves came into your house and then they stole stuff, but then they did tshuva. Yeah, that's appropriate for you for every Yom Kippur, and they're returning the stuff. Nemanim lomer lo naganu. So the tax collectors are believed to say we didn't touch these vessels. Maybe we touched these, we didn't touch those. You believe them, and the ones they didn't touch, you assume the tax collectors are the Am Haaretz. Remember, Jesus is eating with the tax collectors. These are the Am Haaretz, the people you don't eat with, the people you keep separate from. Okay. Anyway, but they're believed to say what they touched and what they didn't touch, so you don't have to worry about the stuff that they touched. Similarly, the Ganav comes and he returns the vessels. Maybe you believe him to say, even though I stole these vessels, I didn't touch the other ones, or maybe even the vessels he's returning, he's believed to say he didn't touch, let's say, the wine inside of it. Let's say it's a pottery vessel that if you don't touch the inside, you don't make it tamei. So they're all believed. Amazing. Even the people, ganavim, tax collectors, people you generally wouldn't believe about this stuff, they are believed. Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim, Nemanim ala Kodesh, people, now this is no longer tax collectors. In Yerushalayim, people are believed about Kodesh. I mean, we also thought in general in Yehuda they're believed about Kodesh. And here's the point I've been telling you. Ubishas haregel, at the time of the regel, afal truma, everybody is believed even on truma. Okay, so the thing about Shas haregel, everybody believed is like the big, huge thing about unifying the people. But the tax collector thing comes first. Let's just read the Gemara on the tax collectors. Let's take a look. Raminahi. We have a brayta that says a Mishnah that says the opposite. Tax collectors came into the house. Kulo tame. You have to assume everything is tame. It says lo kasha. Is there a non-Jew with them or not? If there's a non-Jew with them and he's supervising or whatever, they're going to have to inspect all of your various vessels. So therefore you have to assume they touched everything, and they're not going to. You can't believe them. But if there's not a non-Jew with them, then they'll be more careful. If there is a non-Jew with them, they can say we didn't go into the house because they won't make it up. They can't say we went in and we did not touch. Right? Rashi explains why, because Rashi says not because the non-Jew will make them lie to say they didn't touch, but because you have to assume if there was a non-Jew there, they inspected everything because they didn't want to get in trouble, with the supervisor. Right, yeah. Basically. Okay, so the Gemara says, who cares? Why does it make a difference? They're afraid of him. He represents the government, and they're afraid who's going to report to the government that they didn't do a good enough job. So my binayu, who cares if it's him or it's him reporting? that he's not such an important guy, so they're not afraid of him. But are they still have to afraid that he might report on them? Okay. That presumably would then they wouldn't have to do it, but they wouldn't have to check out everything. It's their fellow Jew. They'll be a little easygoing. They won't do but a non-Jew, he's going to make them, do. Let's just read the one thing about the
Go on the
Ganavin.
next Mishnah. We have several minutes.
We do. It says 8:30 here.
I have 28.
8:28. V'chein haganavim sheyachziru es hakelim. So the Gemara says, Raminu, that you believe in Ganavim that are returning things. You're right. My thing is fast. Raminu, I'll ask you on this. Haganavim shenichnesu v'toch habayis eino tamei ela makom tvisas raglei haganavim. It's only tamei where they're walking. But so that's not exactly clear what the question is. Why is that a problem? It's only where they walked is tamei. But Rashi assumes that the question is, if where they walked you have to assume is tamei, then maybe you have to assume that the vessels that they handled are tamei, and they can't tell you they didn't touch the stuff inside the vessel. Not so clear what the question is. Let's see what the answer is. Amar of Pinchas Mishmei Derav or Mishmei Derabba. Anyway, it's an important answer for every Yom Kippur. Kisha'asu tshuva. When they did tshuva, then because they're returning the vessels, then you believe them because they're returning the vessels. They're doing a tshuva. But when they didn't do tshuva, then you have to assume that wherever they might have touched was tamei. Okay. It says they returned the kelim. Shmamina. That is a good point. Okay. So now the question here is, by the way, what isn't explored is, why do you believe these people? Like, you normally don't believe them about things like Kodesh and Truma and so on. Why do you believe them? Whatever. So Rashi says it's only about Kodesh. And it goes back to the point that you believe Amei Haaretz about Kodesh. Tosha says it's even about Truma. And maybe there's a difference between believing them on their own stuff and believing them on your stuff. Like maybe, for my own stuff, I understand that you're a chaver, and I'm not going to tell you, and I know you care about this or whatever. I'm not going to tell you that I did or didn't touch when it's not true. It's your stuff. But my stuff, what I believe I've done correctly with my stuff, maybe I'll, interpret those facts differently than if you're asking me about how I handled your stuff. And it's true, sometimes it's the reverse. How do we handle other people's property as opposed to how we handle our own? So sometimes some people are more careful with other people's properties. Other people are more sloppy with other people's property. But that is interesting. But Rashi limits it to Kodesh. Okay, you know what? I am going to end here because we will start after Yom Kippur and we'll read how all Yisrael comes together on the Regel as a proper lead-in to Sukkot. So that's what we're going to pick up with Motzei Yom Kippur. Everybody should have an easy and a meaningful fast.
Normal time.